Thank you very much. I've spent 15 years here sandwiched between Robert Chambers and Michael Lipton on the top floor of the Octagon. And when people ask me, why didn't you write more while you were here, the answer is I spent my entire life organising seminars on epistemologies, ontologies, and multidisciplinary definitions of poverty and so on between the two. And I can see from today's discussion that I should come back and organise a few more, because those issues haven't gone away. Robert's been an inspiration and a guide and a mentor, and I hope a friend ever since I first met him in 1978. I'm sorry I wasn't invited to join in the writing of the book, but I did do my own tribute to Robert in 1993 when he won a big prize in Germany, and I hope that's on the IDS website. A lot of his sayings have kind of gone into domestic use. I mean, in our household, we're always saying to each other, we make a mistake, good. Or we say, you know, give me the bloody stick. Stop talking and give me the stick. But I must tell you that despite this encomium of praise for Robert, which is well deserved, last time I spoke at IDS, Robert was in the audience, and I could see his head sinking into his hands as I spoke. And at the end, when he spoke, he said, you know, I need to rescue you from yourself. So thank you, Robert. Anytime I could return the favour. The argument I was making at the alumni event, was it last summer or the summer before over there somewhere, was that a point that Ros has just made. I think we're living in the twilight, a long extended summer twilight of development studies. And certainly of developing country studies as we've known it since 1978. Why? Because more and more countries are now middle-income countries, because convergence is spreading, and because we face a different set of problems. And I know that's a kind of slightly controversial thing, and I know there's, of course, many poor people, but the world is different. And I looked up, Robert, to see something about Kenya, where you started in 1958, but I couldn't find 1958, but I found 1960. And of course, Kenya, you know, is not the easiest case to take if you want to make this point. Population in 1960, 10 million. Population today, 40 million. A very, very complicated political place with a lot of poverty. But do you know what? Infant mortality is way down in Kenya. Literacy, when Robert arrived, was 20%, I guess, of adults could read and write. Now the figure is 87%. Infant mortality was 126 per thousand. It's now down to a much lower level. Under 5 mortality is only 84 per thousand. Life is better. And we should stop beating ourselves up in development. The development project over the last half century has been an astonishing success. And I don't think we take the credit. I think people themselves take the credit, and to a limited extent their governments. But let's not pretend that we're constantly in a state of crisis, because we're not. And as we think about the future of work on poverty, more and more we will be drawn to do the kind of work that Andrea was talking about this morning, which is looking at poverty, not just in one set of countries where we can define a particular methodology, but in the whole world. And there isn't that much difference, actually, between poverty in many developing countries and poverty in the UK, and we need common frameworks to deal with them. We don't need developing country studies, we need poverty studies and social inclusion studies and welfare studies. And facing both rich and poor countries is the new agenda, which will frame development studies in the future, which is the global agenda. I'm working a lot on climate change and development. We talk about mitigation and adaptation. Let me tell you, climate change and the measures we take to deal with it will reshape the global economy over the next 20 years, with new industries springing up, old industries dying. This is Schumpeter writ large. That's the problem we need to deal with. What are the policies? What are the institutions? What's the funding to help countries make those long-term transitions? Does that make Robert irrelevant? Does that mean that the work that we all did, so many of us, sitting with farmers in villages, doing PRAs, working on multidimensional poverty, irrelevant? It doesn't. And there are 6 things I take into the future from Robert's work, and that should shape all the work we do. Number 1, working in our field is about commitment. Robert's phrase, you must do what makes your heart beat faster. If you don't get up every morning furious and inspired and determined to do something about global exclusion and poverty, then you might as well stay in bed and not get up too. We need to find this idea about sustainable livelihoods and social inclusion, but not just for particular groups of people, for everybody, and in their relations with each other, and not just as an objective standard. So looking not just at poverty in developing countries, but at relative poverty as between developed and developing countries, building on all the work that Robert did on sustainable livelihoods. Avoiding urban bias. He's always saying that people like me don't go to developing countries and don't sit in villages and don't go out at the weekend and don't go off the tarmac road. And you know what, it's true, sadly. But we need to make sure that we are out there and experiencing and learning. Fourth, the whole question of ontologies and methodologies and using PRA and PRA methods in these new contexts. I've done work with ministers in the UK using PRA methods on a sheet of paper, not quite on the floor, to look at the overall shape of the aid programme. I have a packet of 20 M&Ms I carry out around, and I say to them, each one of these is 5% of the aid programme, let's move it around the table. I've done similar work on ranking aid donors and allocating money as between the World Bank, the UN, the EU and the bilaterals, using PRA methods to address exactly the big global challenges that will shape our profession. Finally, fifthly and penultimately, process planning. Robert's sustained attack on blueprints, on the logical framework, linking to postmodernism, to the work that people like Ben Ramalingan are doing on complexity, and starting small and growing and exploring and not over-dominating with centrally determined blueprints. These are highly relevant messages. They're not the same context in which we used to apply them, but they are the same techniques, the same principles and the same values. And I want to end on something which I think is really important, which is that we need to be optimistic in presenting messages to the world and offering solutions to people and not just offering problems. Napoleon said, a leader is a dealer in hope. And as Anthony Giddens is always saying, Martin Luther King did not stand up and say, I have a nightmare. He stood up and said, I have a dream. Robert, you've had a dream. You have been a leader. You have dealt in hope. I think that's the one thing I carry away from a 30-year relationship with you, so thank you very much.